The research station on Kepler 442b hummed with nervous energy. Jake Murphy stood in the main conference room, watching the alien delegation approach through the reinforced windows. The Volari moved like predators, each step precise and controlled. Their feline features reminded him of big cats from Earth, but their eyes held an intelligence that made his skin prickle. Dr. Helen Price gripped the edge of the table. She was the station commander, responsible for making this first contact work. Her knuckles were white with tension. Behind her, Security Officer Danny Cole kept his hand near his weapon, though everyone knew it would be useless against the Volari if things went wrong. Jake was just the xenobiologist. His job was to observe and learn. He had spent months studying what little data they had on the Volari. They were warriors, territorial, and they had never allowed outsiders into their communities. Every previous attempt at contact had ended in failure. The door slid open. 7 Volari entered the room, their movements synchronized and fluid. At the center walked their leader, Elder Vosh, distinguished by silver markings along his muzzle. But Jake's attention was drawn to the female warrior on Vosh's right. She was taller than the others, her fur a deep amber color. Her eyes swept the room, assessing threats. The translator device crackled to life as Elder Vosh spoke. His words came through stilted and formal. Helen responded with equal formality, outlining the benefits of cooperation between their species. Jake could see the tension in every Volari posture. They did not want to be here. The meeting dragged on. Questions were asked and answered with careful precision. Jake noticed the Amber Warrior becoming more agitated. Her tail lashed back and forth. Her ears flattened against her skull. The room was too crowded, too many humans too close. He recognized the signs of an animal about to bolt or attack. Helen continued talking, unaware of the danger. Danny noticed too, his hand moving closer to his weapon. That would make everything worse. Jake moved without thinking. He stepped forward, passing Helen, and approached the Amber Warrior. The other Volari stiffened, ready to defend her. Jake reached out slowly, the same way he would approach a frightened animal. His hand settled gently on top of her head, between her ears. He patted twice, softly, the way his grandmother used to calm him when he was overwhelmed as a child. It was instinct, nothing more. The room went silent. Every Volari froze. The Amber Warrior's eyes widened, her pupils dilating. Then, slowly, her aggressive posture melted away. Her ears lifted. Her tail stopped its angry movements. She stood perfectly still, staring at Jake with an expression he could not read. Elder Vosh made a sound like a sharp exhale. The other Volari took a step back from Jake. One of them bowed his head slightly. Jake pulled his hand away, suddenly aware that everyone was staring at him. He had done something wrong. He could feel it in the air, heavy and charged. Helen cleared her throat, trying to resume the meeting. But the atmosphere had changed completely. The Volari were no longer focused on her. They were all watching Jake and the Amber Warrior. Vosh spoke rapidly in their language, not bothering with the translator. The Amber Warrior responded, her voice low and steady. The translator finally caught up. Vosh was asking her something. Her answer came through clearly.
No.
She would not denounce what had happened. The other Volari exchanged glances that Jake could not interpret. He felt like he had stepped into a cultural minefield without a map. The meeting ended abruptly. Elder Vosh informed them that the Volari needed to discuss matters internally. As they filed out, the Amber Warrior remained behind for a moment. She looked directly at Jake, then touched her own head where he had patted her. Then she turned and followed her people. Helen rounded on Jake as soon as the door closed. What was he thinking? He had no authorization to touch the aliens. He could have started a war. Danny looked equally angry. But Jake could only think about the way the warrior had looked at him. Not with anger or disgust. With something else entirely. That night, Jake could not sleep. He reviewed every second of the encounter in his mind. The way she had been on the edge of violence. The way she had completely relaxed under his touch. The way the other Volari had reacted with what looked like shock and respect. He had made a mistake, but he could not figure out what kind. The next morning, Elder Vosh returned alone. He asked to speak with Jake privately. Helen protested, But Vosh was firm. They sat across from each other in a small meeting room. Vosh studied Jake for a long moment before speaking through the translator. The elder explained that head-touching among the Valari was sacred. It was done between life-bonded pairs and between parent and offspring. Never between strangers. Never in public. By touching Kira's head, Jake had performed a bonding gesture. By accepting it without violence, Kira had acknowledged a bond claim. Jake's stomach dropped. He tried to apologize, to explain it was just a calming gesture from his culture. Vosh held up a hand. The damage was done. Or perhaps it was not damage at all. Kira was the daughter of a high-ranking warrior family. She had refused every male who had tried to claim her. She was considered too aggressive, too dangerous to bond with. But she had accepted Jake's touch. More than that, she had submitted to it completely. In Valari culture, this meant she recognized him as worthy. As her bondmate. Vosh wanted to know if Jake would honor this bond or reject it. Rejection would bring shame to Kira's family. Acceptance would make Jake the first outsider ever bonded to a Valari warrior. Jake asked for time to think. Vosh granted him 1 day. As the elder left, he mentioned one more thing. Kira had asked permission to guard Jake while he considered his decision. It was her right as the bond claimed. Vosh had agreed. Jake would find her outside his quarters. Sure enough, when Jake left the meeting room, Kira was waiting. She stood against the wall near his quarters, her amber eyes tracking his movement. When he approached, she fell into step beside him. She did not speak. She simply positioned herself between him and everyone else in the corridor. Jake realized with a strange mix of fear and wonder that his life had just become very complicated. Kira followed Jake everywhere. When he went to the lab, she stood outside the door. When he ate in the cafeteria, she positioned herself at a nearby table where she could watch the entire room. When he tried to attend a briefing with Helen, Kira blocked the doorway until Jake explained she could enter with him. The other humans did not know how to react. Some gave them a wide berth. Others stared openly. Danny tried to approach Jake in the corridor to discuss security protocols. Kira stepped between them, a low growl rumbling in her chest. Danny backed away, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. Jake quickly called Kira off, but the message was clear. She would not let anyone get too close. Helen was less easily deterred. She cornered Jake in his quarters on the second day. Kira was right outside, her shadow visible under the door. Helen demanded to know what Jake planned to do. This bond situation was disrupting station operations. The other Valari were treating Jake with deference that made negotiations awkward. She needed him to reject the bond and restore normal relations. Jake asked what would happen to Kira if he rejected her. Helen admitted she did not know. But the mission had to come first. Personal feelings could not interfere with first contact protocols. Jake thanked her for her input and asked her to leave. He needed to think. Helen left frustrated, nearly colliding with Kira in the doorway. That evening, Jake sat on his bunk and called Kira into his quarters. She entered slowly, her movements careful and controlled. She sat on the floor across from him, her tail curled around her legs. They looked at each other in silence. Jake realized he knew almost nothing about her except that she had chosen to accept his accidental bond gesture. He asked her, through the translator he had borrowed, why she accepted his touch. Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke in halting, broken human language. She had been learning. His touch had no hunger for dominance. No aggression. Just gentle care. Every Valari male who had tried to claim her wanted to prove their strength. They wanted to conquer her. He just wanted to help her feel calm. Jake understood then. She was tired of being seen as a prize to be won. He had treated her like a person who needed comfort, not a challenge to overcome. He asked if she truly wanted this bond or if she felt obligated because of tradition. Kira's eyes narrowed. She wanted it. She had chosen. Did he want it? Jake admitted he did not fully understand what it meant. But he was willing to learn if she was willing to teach him. Kira's tension eased. She moved closer, not threatening, just closing the distance between them. She explained that bonded pairs protected each other, trusted each other, stood together against the world. It was not about romance or mating, though those could come later. It was about partnership. Jake made his decision. He would accept the bond. He would learn Valari customs and try to be the partner Kira deserved. But he had one condition. She had to stop growling at every human who came near him. They could not function as a team if she attacked his colleagues. Kira considered this. She agreed, but only if the humans approached with respect and announced their intentions. Fair enough, Jake thought. The next morning, Jake informed Elder Vosh of his decision. The old Valari showed something that might have been approval. He explained that Jake would need to participate in a bonding ceremony to make the bond official in Valari society. Jake agreed. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 days later, giving Jake time to learn the proper protocols. Kira became his teacher. She showed him Valari gestures of respect and trust. She taught him phrases in her language. She explained the importance of body language among her people. Jake was a quick student, and Kira was a patient teacher. They fell into a rhythm, spending hours together each day. The humans remained skeptical. Helen called in a specialist from Earth, a xenopsychologist named Dr. Lisa Grant. Lisa arrived within the week, eager to study this unprecedented situation. She interviewed Jake extensively, asking about his motivations and mental state. She seemed to be looking for signs that he was being manipulated or coerced. Jake assured her he was acting of his own free will. Lisa then turned her attention to studying Valari bonding customs. She spoke with Elder Vosh and other Valari scholars. What she learned fascinated her. The bond was not ownership. It was mutual protection and partnership. The bond-claimed partner was considered sacred, defended at all costs. But the defender also relied on their partner for guidance and support. Lisa discovered something else that surprised everyone. Kira had been considered unbondable not just because of her aggressive nature, but because of her intelligence and independence. Valari males found her threatening. She questioned orders, strategized in battle, and refused to submit to those she did not respect. She was exactly the kind of warrior the Valari needed, but her own people could not see past tradition. Jake had unknowingly accomplished what no Valari could. He had earned Kira's respect without trying to dominate her. The other Valari saw this and recognized the bond as legitimate. Some even seemed relieved that Kira had finally found a suitable partner, even if he was an alien. The night before the ceremony, Jake could not sleep. He lay in his bunk, wondering if he was making the right choice. He had come to this planet as a scientist, and now he was about to become bonded to an alien warrior. His life would never be the same. But when he thought about rejecting Kira, about the shame it would bring her, he knew he could not do it. Kira sensed his restlessness. She entered his quarters without knocking, a privilege she now claimed as his bond partner. She sat beside his bunk in the darkness. She did not speak. She simply placed her hand over his, her claws retracted. Jake felt the tension drain from his body. Whatever tomorrow brought, they would face it together. The ceremony took place at dawn in the Valari settlement. Jake wore simple clothes, as instructed. The Valari gathered in a circle around them. Elder Vosh presided. The ritual was surprisingly brief. Vosh asked Jake to place his hand on Kira's head. Jake did so, this time understanding the significance. Vosh asked Kira to accept or reject. She accepted clearly and without hesitation. Then Kira placed her hand on Jake's head in return. This, Vosh explained, was unusual. Traditionally, only the dominant partner claimed the other. But Kira insisted on mutual claiming. She wanted Jake to know she chose him as much as he chose her. The gathered Valari murmured in surprise, but no one objected. The bond was sealed. Jake and Kira were now recognized as a bonded pair by Valari law. The implications would only become clear in the days and weeks to come. But as they walked back to the human station together, Jake felt something he had not expected. He felt like he belonged. For the first time since arriving on this alien world, he had found his place. And it was right beside the fierce warrior who had trusted him enough to let him into her life. The weeks following the bonding ceremony brought unexpected changes to the research station. Jake and Kira developed a working partnership that surprised everyone, including themselves. Jake spent his mornings in the lab analyzing Valari biology and culture. Kira spent hers training with other Valari warriors who had begun visiting the station more frequently. Dr. Lisa Grant had stayed on to document the bond. She filled notebooks with observations about how Jake and Kira communicated. They had developed a hybrid language, mixing human words with Valari gestures. When words failed, they seemed to understand each other through body language alone. Lisa called it unprecedented cross-species synchronization. But not everyone was pleased. Captain Ryan Bell arrived from Earth with a military assessment team. His job was to evaluate whether the Valari could be trusted as potential allies. He was a practical man who viewed the bond between Jake and Kira as a complication. During his first briefing, he made his position clear. Personal attachments had no place in diplomatic relations. Jake sat through the briefing with Kira standing behind his chair. Captain Bell suggested that Jake should return to Earth for a full psychological evaluation. Kira's tail began to lash. Jake reached back without looking and placed his hand on her arm. She calmed immediately, but her eyes never left the captain. Helen tried to mediate. She explained that separating Jake and Kira now would insult the Valari and potentially destroy months of diplomatic progress. Captain Bell was unmoved. He had his orders. Jake needed to be evaluated, and the bond needed to be studied under controlled conditions on Earth. That meant both Jake and Kira would have to leave Kepler, 442b. Elder Vosh was consulted. He listened carefully to Captain Bell's proposal. Then he explained something that changed everything. In Valari culture, a bonded pair represented both species in all matters. Jake was now considered a Valari representative. Kira was considered a human representative. Any negotiations had to include them both. To exclude them would be to reject the bond itself. Captain Bell found himself in an impossible position. He could not negotiate with the Valari without going through Jake and Kira. But his orders required him to separate them for evaluation. Lisa suggested a compromise. Instead of forcing them to Earth, bring the evaluation team here. Study the bond in its natural context. Bell reluctantly agreed, but he added a condition. The bond had to prove its value to the Alliance. That night, Jake asked Kira what they had gotten themselves into. She responded in her improving human speech. They had become a bridge. Two species that had never trusted outsiders were now forced to work through them. It was terrifying and exciting. Jake had to agree. He had never imagined his simple gesture of comfort would lead to this. The real test came 2 weeks later. A Valari warrior named Shrak challenged the legitimacy of the bond. Shrak was powerful, ambitious, and traditional. He declared publicly that Jake was too weak to be bonded to a high-ranking warrior like Kira. The bond was false because it violated the natural order. A prey species could not claim a predator. Elder Vosh convened a council. According to Valari law, disputed bonds could be challenged through ritual combat. If the bond was true, the bonded pair would fight together to defend it. If it was false, they would fail and the bond would be dissolved. Shrak demanded the ritual. Kira accepted before Jake could even process what was happening. Jake pulled Kira aside after the council. He could not fight Shrak. He had no combat training. He would be killed in seconds. Kira explained that he did not need to fight physically. In Valari tradition, bonded pairs fought as one unit. She would handle the physical combat. He would provide strategic guidance. Their mental synchronization would prove the bond's legitimacy. Lisa confirmed this after researching Valari combat rituals. The bond was tested through cooperation, not individual strength. Jake's role was to observe the fight and guide Kira with tactical advice. If they worked together seamlessly, the bond would be proven true. If they failed to coordinate, the bond would be declared false and Kira would be shamed. Jake spent the next 3 days studying Valari combat techniques. He watched hours of footage from Valari training sessions. He analyzed Shrak's fighting style, looking for patterns and weaknesses. Kira trained physically, but every evening she sat with Jake while he explained what he had learned. They discussed strategies and contingencies. The ritual took place in the Valari settlement's central arena. The entire Valari population gathered to witness. Captain Bell and his team attended as observers. Helen looked worried. Danny kept his hand near his weapon, though everyone knew he could not intervene. Lisa recorded everything with scientific detachment. Shrek entered the arena first, moving with predatory confidence. Kira followed, her expression calm and focused. Jake stood at the edge of the arena, his heart pounding. Elder Vosh explained the rules. The combat would continue until one fighter yielded or was unable to continue. Jake could speak to Kira but could not enter the arena. Kira could not speak to Jake but could act on his guidance. The fight began. Shrek attacked immediately, using his size and strength to try to overwhelm Kira. She dodged and deflected, not committing to any counterattacks. Jake watched carefully. Shrek favored his right side. He dropped his guard slightly after heavy strikes. Jake called out observations to Kira in their hybrid language. She adjusted her movements in response. The watching Valari murmured in approval. The coordination was clear. Kira moved in response to Jake's words before Shrek could react. When Shrek feinted left, Jake called it out and Kira was ready for the real attack from the right. When Shrek tried to grapple, Jake warned Kira about the opening in his defense. She exploited it perfectly. Shrek became frustrated. His attacks grew wilder and less controlled. Jake saw the pattern. Shrek was tiring. His breathing was labored. Jake told Kira to wait for the overextension. It came 30 seconds later. Shrek lunged with all his strength. Kira sidestepped and struck at the exact weak point Jake had identified. Shrek went down hard. The arena fell silent. Shrek tried to rise but could not. Kira stood over him, waiting. Elder Vosh asked Shrek if he yielded. After a long moment, Shrek admitted defeat. The bond was legitimate. The gathered Valari erupted in approval. Kira walked calmly to Jake. She placed her forehead against his. They had proven themselves. Captain Bell approached Jake after the ritual. He admitted he had underestimated what the bond represented. It was not just a personal relationship. It was a functional partnership that combined human and Valari strengths. The military could learn from this. Jake and Kira had just demonstrated a new model for cross-species cooperation. Bell would report this to Earth Command. That evening, Jake and Kira sat together in his quarters. They were both exhausted but satisfied. Kira spoke in nearly fluent human language now. She told Jake she had never doubted they would succeed. He had seen things in combat that she had missed. She had executed strategies he could not. Together, they were stronger than either could be alone. Jake realized she was right. The bond was not a limitation. It was an amplification of both their abilities. And it had just changed the future of human-Valari relations forever. 3 months after the combat ritual, Earth sent Ambassador Claire West to negotiate a formal alliance with the Valari. Claire was efficient, experienced, and completely unprepared for what she found. The Valari refused to meet with her directly. All communications had to go through Jake and Kira, the officially recognized representatives of both species. Claire was not pleased. She had spent 20 years in the diplomatic corps. She had negotiated treaties with 3 different alien species. She did not appreciate being forced to work through a xenobiologist and his alien partner. She made her feelings clear during their first meeting. This arrangement was unacceptable. She demanded direct access to Valari leadership. Elder Vosh explained through Jake and Kira that the Valari way was non-negotiable. The bond had opened doors that centuries of isolation had kept closed. To bypass the bonded pair would be to reject the bridge they represented. Claire could work through Jake and Kira, or she could return to Earth empty-handed. The choice was hers. Claire chose to stay. She spent her first week observing how Jake and Kira worked together. They held daily meetings with Valari Council members and human station personnel. Jake handled technical and cultural explanations. Kira provided context about Valari traditions and expectations. They moved seamlessly between roles, each supporting the other. What frustrated Claire most was how effective they were. Disputes that would have taken weeks to resolve were settled in days. Misunderstandings were caught and corrected before they could escalate. The Valari trusted Kira completely. The humans trusted Jake. Together, they created a space where both species could communicate honestly. But Claire had orders from Earth. She needed to establish formal trade agreements, military cooperation protocols, and cultural exchange programs. She needed everything documented and approved by both governments. Jake and Kira were facilitators, not policymakers. Claire needed to speak with Valari leadership directly about specifics that the bonded pair might not fully understand. Lisa suggested a solution. Claire should train Jake and Kira in formal diplomatic procedures. If they understood what Earth needed and how to present it in Valari terms, they could negotiate on Claire's behalf. Claire resisted at first. This violated every protocol she knew. But she had no other options. She began teaching Jake and Kira the intricacies of interstellar law and treaty formation. Jake proved to be a quick study. His scientific background helped him understand the technical aspects. Kira was more skeptical. She questioned every clause and condition. Why did humans need so much documentation? Why could they not simply agree to help each other and trust that both sides would honor their word? Claire explained that human governments required proof and accountability. This led to a deeper discussion about the differences between human and Valari societies. Valari culture was built on personal honor and direct relationships. Bonds were sacred. Promises were kept or the individual was shamed. Humans relied on laws and contracts because their societies were too large for personal accountability to work. Neither system was wrong. They were just different. Jake and Kira worked to create hybrid agreements that satisfied both approaches. They proposed treaties that included formal documentation for humans but were sealed with public bonding ceremonies that held weight in Valari culture. Claire was skeptical, but she submitted the proposals to Earth. To her surprise, Earth Command approved them. The approach was innovative and showed respect for Valari traditions. The negotiations moved forward. Trade routes were established. Military cooperation was outlined. Cultural exchange programs were designed. Jake and Kira facilitated everything, but Claire noticed something else happening. Young Valari had started approaching the research station. They were curious about humans. They wanted to learn about Earth culture. One young Valari female named Sarah was particularly bold. She asked Jake to teach her human language. She wanted to understand how humans thought. Jake agreed and started informal classes. Sarah brought friends. Soon there was a small group of young Valari learning about human culture directly from Jake, with Kira supervising and providing context. This worried some of the older Valari. They saw it as their youth being corrupted by alien ideas. But Elder Vosh defended the exchange. The bond between Jake and Kira had proven that Valari and humans could work together. Young Valari needed to learn about other species if the alliance was to last. Isolation had kept the Valari safe but also kept them stagnant. Claire watched these changes with mixed feelings. On one hand, the alliance was proceeding better than anyone had hoped. On the other hand, it was all centered on two individuals. What would happen if something happened to Jake or Kira? Would the entire alliance collapse? She raised these concerns with Lisa, who had become an unofficial advisor. Lisa pointed out that the alliance was already spreading beyond Jake and Kira. Sarah and her friends represented a new generation of Valari who were interested in cross-species cooperation. Human researchers were learning Valari customs. The bond had been the catalyst, but the changes were becoming embedded in both cultures. The bridge was expanding. The formal alliance treaty was signed 6 months after Claire's arrival. The ceremony combined human and Valari traditions. Claire represented Earth government. Elder Vosh represented the Valari Council. Jake and Kira stood between them, literal bridges between two worlds. The treaty was documented in human fashion and sealed with Valari bonding rituals. After the ceremony, Claire approached Jake privately. She admitted she had been wrong about him and Kira. She had seen them as obstacles to proper diplomacy. But they had accomplished something she could never have done alone. They had not just negotiated an alliance. They had built a foundation for genuine cross-species understanding. She respected that. Jake thanked her but explained that none of it had been planned. He had just tried to help someone who was overwhelmed. Everything else had grown from that one moment of accidental compassion. Claire smiled and said that was exactly why it worked. The best diplomacy came from genuine care for others, not from protocols and procedures. That night, Jake and Kira sat together watching the stars. They had become something neither had expected. They were partners, friends, and symbols of what two species could accomplish together. Kira asked Jake if he ever regretted that moment when he patted her head. Jake thought about it. His life had become complicated and difficult, but it had also become meaningful in ways he never imagined. He told Kira he had no regrets. She rumbled her approval, the Valari equivalent of a laugh. She admitted she had been terrified that day. Surrounded by aliens, overwhelmed by their strange customs, ready to fight just to escape. Then Jake had touched her head with such gentle care. She had felt seen as a person, not as a threat. That moment had changed everything for her too. They sat in comfortable silence, two souls from different worlds who had found understanding in each other. 1 year after the Alliance Treaty was signed, the research station on Kepler 442b had transformed completely. What began as a small human outpost had become a thriving center of cross-species cooperation. Valari and humans worked side by side in labs and workshops. Young Valari like Sarah now spoke fluent human languages. Human researchers had learned to read Valari body language. Jake and Kira remained at the center of it all. They had settled into their roles as cultural ambassadors and mediators. Every day brought new challenges. A human scientist would accidentally insult Valari traditions. A Valari warrior would misunderstand human humor. Jake and Kira worked tirelessly to bridge the gaps and prevent misunderstandings from becoming conflicts. But something had started to shift. Jake noticed Kira becoming withdrawn during large gatherings. She stood closer to him than usual. Her protective behaviors, which had lessened over the months, were returning. When Colonel Andrew Hayes arrived from Earth to establish a joint military base, Kira's anxiety became obvious. She growled at the armed soldiers who accompanied him. Jake pulled her aside after the meeting. He asked what was wrong. Kira struggled to explain. The military presence reminded her of past conflicts. Before humans arrived, the Valari had fought invading species. Her family had lost many warriors. She carried scars from those battles, both physical and mental. Seeing armed groups triggered those memories. Jake understood then. Everyone saw Kira as a fierce warrior, strong and unshakable. But she had vulnerabilities she had never shown anyone. She had trusted him with her fears because he had never treated her as just a weapon. He had seen her as a person first. He asked what he could do to help. Kira admitted she did not know. She just needed him to understand. That evening, Jake researched Valari comfort rituals. He found one used between bonded pairs during times of stress. It involved gentle pressure on specific points along the spine and shoulders, combined with low vocalizations. Lisa confirmed it was legitimate and often used to help warriors cope with trauma. Jake decided to try it. He approached Kira in their shared quarters. He asked permission to perform the ritual. She was surprised but agreed. Jake followed the steps carefully, applying gentle pressure while humming in the low-register Valari used for comfort. Kira relaxed gradually. Her breathing slowed. When the ritual ended, she looked at him with something like wonder. No one had ever cared enough to learn this for her. Kira opened up more after that. She explained that her aggressive behavior toward others was not possessiveness. It was fear. She had lost so many in past wars. Her family, her friends, her entire warrior unit. When she bonded with Jake, he became the most important person in her life. The thought of losing him terrified her. So she pushed everyone else away to keep him safe. Jake assured her that he was not going anywhere. But he also explained that her fear was limiting both of them. They could not build a bridge between species if she kept pushing everyone away. She needed to trust that others could approach him without threatening their bond. Kira struggled with this but agreed to try. She knew he was right. The change was gradual. Kira stopped growling at every human who approached Jake. She allowed conversations to happen without positioning herself as a physical barrier. When Colonel Hayes requested a private meeting with Jake about military protocols, Kira agreed to wait outside. It was difficult for her, but she did it. Jake made sure the meeting was brief and returned to her quickly. Hayes noticed the change too. He approached Jake later and asked what had shifted. Jake explained that Kira was working through trauma from past conflicts. She was learning to trust again. Hayes understood. Many soldiers struggled with similar issues. He offered to connect Kira with human therapists who specialized in combat trauma. Jake thanked him and brought the offer to Kira. Kira was hesitant at first. Valari did not discuss such things openly. But Jake pointed out that humans had learned to address mental wounds the same way they treated physical ones. There was no shame in seeking help. Kira agreed to meet with a therapist. The sessions were difficult but helpful. She began to understand that her protective instincts came from unprocessed grief and fear. As Kira healed, the bond between her and Jake deepened. It was no longer just about protection and partnership. It was about mutual support and growth. They pushed each other to be better. Jake encouraged Kira to face her fears. Kira challenged Jake to understand perspectives beyond his own. They learned from each other constantly. The joint military base was established 3 months later. Kira attended the opening ceremony without incident. She stood beside Jake as representatives of both species gathered. When a young human soldier nervously approached Jake with a question about Valari customs, Kira did not growl. She simply listened as Jake explained. Progress. Sarah and her group of young Valari had formed friendships with human researchers. They studied together, shared meals, and learned about each other's cultures. One day, Sarah approached Jake with a question. A human friend wanted to show affection to a Valari they liked. Would it be appropriate to touch their head? Jake and Kira exchanged a knowing look. Jake explained the significance of head touching in Valari culture. It was not casual. It represented deep trust and commitment. The human should understand what it meant before attempting it. Sarah thanked him and took the information back to her friends. Later, Jake learned that the human and Valari had discussed it and decided to start with less significant gestures. They would build to head touching if their friendship developed into something more. Kira commented that things had changed so much. A year ago, the idea of a human and Valari forming a bond would have been unthinkable. Now young Valari were learning human customs specifically to build those connections. Jake had started something that was spreading far beyond them. Kira admitted she was proud to be part of it. Jake organized cultural exchange sessions where mixed groups of humans and Valari learned about each other. He invited guest speakers from both species to share their perspectives. Kira often co-hosted these sessions, providing Valari context to human concepts and vice versa. They made a good team. Everyone could see it. During one session, a young human researcher asked about the bond between Jake and Kira. How did it work? What did it feel like? Jake looked at Kira, unsure how to answer. Kira spoke instead. The bond was like having someone who saw you completely, all your strengths and all your flaws, and chose to stand with you anyway. It was trust. It was partnership. It was belonging. Jake added that the bond worked both ways. Kira protected him, yes. But he also protected her. Not physically, but emotionally. He gave her space to be vulnerable. She gave him purpose beyond his research. They had both grown because of each other. The bond was not about one person claiming another. It was about two people choosing to walk through life together. The session ended with applause from both species. Sarah approached afterward and thanked them for being honest. She said many young Valari were inspired by their bond. It showed that strength could be gentle, that protection could be mutual, that different species could find common ground if they were willing to try. Jake felt humbled. He had not set out to be anyone's inspiration. 2 years after that first accidental head pat, Jake and Kira stood together watching the sunset over the Valari settlement. The research station had expanded. The alliance was strong. Cultural exchange programs were flourishing. Young Valari and humans were building friendships that would last lifetimes. All because Jake had tried to comfort someone who was overwhelmed. Kira leaned against Jake's shoulder, a gesture of affection she had learned from humans. She asked if he ever wondered what would have happened if he had not touched her head that day. Jake admitted he thought about it sometimes. They probably would have negotiated some basic trade agreement. Maybe established limited contact. But nothing like what they had now. Kira agreed. One moment of unexpected kindness had changed the course of two species. Jake had seen her as a person in distress, not as a dangerous alien. He had responded with compassion instead of fear. That simple act had built a bridge that thousands now crossed. She was grateful it had been him. Grateful that his instinct had been to comfort rather than to retreat. Jake took her hand, intertwining their fingers in a hybrid gesture that combined human and Valari customs. He told her he was grateful too. She had trusted him when she had every reason not to. She had opened her world to him. She had challenged him to grow. She had become his partner in the truest sense. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. That was the real strength of their bond. As the sun set and the stars emerged, Jake and Kira sat in peaceful silence. Around them, their two species were learning to coexist. Learning to trust. Learning that differences could be strengths instead of barriers. It all started with one gentle touch. One moment of compassion. One human who saw beyond appearances and one Valari who had the courage to accept unexpected kindness. Together, they had built something beautiful. And it was only the beginning.